new innovations will there be? So in the healthcare sectors, also power and utilities, and so forth. But if you think from a consultancy company that EY is, clients always ask, so where should I put, my efforts and what should I do? Obviously, if you look at the top 5, you'll have a rough idea on where you will see big things. But the truth is obviously that this is a hypothesis, this is a calculation and estimations, naturally based on current industries and businesses. But the truth of 5G is happening right now, and it's going to happen over the next years when really the full-fledged 5G is rolled out. And all the new use cases will start to emerge, something we don't even know about yet. So if we look at the next slide and think about from the communication service providers, the ones who provide the connectivity. So right now you see the small LTE or 4G symbol in your smartphone. Soon when you get a new model, you're also going to see 5G. And for these CSPs, the communication service providers, the mobile operators, they have to figure out what to do in their business because they are now facing a so-called CapEx wall. They need to invest in new equipment, new technology, and they are still paying the huge investments for the previous version, so the 4G. And this means basically that they will have to also figure out new business models, and we will see emerging of new entrants and so on within the next years. If you look at the picture, you see the B2B enablement. So a conventional CSP down in the left-hand corner has to make some decision how they want to proceed to actually capture the opportunity. Either they go for the conventional consumer business, which is usually 90% of their business today, that's us, consumers, or they go for the enterprise game, which is now today a quite small portion of it. But as we saw from the previous slide, the growth area we'll see actually that is in the enterprise game. And that means either B2B or B2C, but then you also have the yellow box there, the true ecosystem enablement. So 5G, it's all about ecosystem and converging things with new technologies and providing new use cases. So we usually can call that also the B2B to X model, a real ecosystem platform approach for driving new business. And this is something that several CSPs are thinking of, but today it's still in early infancies. And these are things we actually help them with to actually carve out new business models and how to do it. This is a more detailed picture of the previous one. Here you actually see what's going to happen. You're going to see the new entrants popping up, smaller, more niche CSPs that will serve the enterprises because they will be much more nimble. They will actually be closer to the end customers. So if you can imagine that today's communication service providers, most of them are used to working with wholesale business for enterprises, and then they have the consumer business, which they do manage very well. But actually starting to empower industries or hospitals and so on with specific 5G use cases, that's going to be a challenging game for them. And that's why you're going to see new entrants who actually know that domain better. They have a nimble workforce. They understand solution selling and so on. You're also going to start seeing M&As, so consolidations happening in the market. And naturally, this will take time. Different markets are in different stages. So the figures you saw on the first slide, that was on a global level. Naturally, we have different industry ecosystems in different regions. So the numbers will look differently if you go to Scandinavia, the Nordics, you go to Central Europe, you go to South America, you go to the US and so on. We also have to understand that certain countries will not immediately jump onto 5G. It will take time before 5G will start to emerge. But my final comment on this one is really on this slide is that COVID has taught us a lot of new things. Suddenly the world changed. People started to work from home. So the capacity demand started to look differently. So where areas where the so-called communication service providers didn't really see a huge demand in a lot of traffic, suddenly there was. People didn't anymore stay in the office, they worked from home. All the students suddenly were sitting at home and doing live streaming and starting to do the homeschooling. And this has an impact on how we will see the world unfold with 5G and so on. So the fixed wireless access use cases will for sure be accelerated. Also the fibers to the home, there will be a demand. But then we're going into the industries. We saw in the news is that, you know, factories had to close down. What do they do when workforces get sick and so on? You have to start to figure out, how can I run my productions with, you know, less interruption? So what can I then take 5G and together with other technologies into use and actually be less dependent on people, that they can actually support the productions from home and so on. All of these things will affect what's happening next. This slide here is really one of the essence of 5G. It's an ecosystem play. It will affect the complete industry wheel where you see there. You see everything from homes to financial institutions, down to power and utilities and so forth. Okay, some of the people will now say, yeah, but you can probably use a lot of use cases already with 4G. That's correct. But it doesn't change the fact that new business models and entrants they will now use the existing 4.9G, let's say that private LTE technology. And once the full-fledged 5G is available with all the functionalities like the massive IoT and also the ultra-low latency is available, then they're going to slowly transition towards new technologies. One other key thing here is as well that it is an ecosystem play, also from a technology point of view. So if we don't have the 5G chipsets and so on embedded into industrial applications and so on, we're not going to see a huge, let's say, retrofit play. It's going to take time. Maybe greenfield factories will roll out much quicker new technology than existing brownfield ones. But obviously, there's going to be a mix, and I think COVID has made some changes on this. Especially now when you're sitting there at home listening to this and you're thinking, okay, so 5G, that's just another G. You're right. There's going to be 6G. And especially 5G by itself will not change the world, but it's 5G together with enabling technologies, AI, AR, and all of these things. And then together with, you know, the whole process where you're going to apply it, that needs to provide business value. If it doesn't provide business value, why would anyone invest? So think of use cases. And when we talk about use cases of 5G, use case is actually solving a problem or helping a new business provide value. So sometimes I'm a little bit annoyed also that everyone talks about 5G use cases. That's great, but let's think about what is the outcome that you're trying to solve with this technology. That's only enabling and doing something. But now when you start to think of these use cases, I mean, the fact is, we don't even know half of what the future 5G use cases will be. We are going to learn. There's going to be platforms. There's going to be new innovation. And this all, together with your thinking and the industries, that's going to be the future. And now I'm going to hand over to Nina and Emilia from the Capstone BD course. So we run a joint project where they did a fantastic study on the Finnish 5G industrial markets. They're going to talk about what the industries thought and thinks about 5G right now. This study was done just a month ago, or basically a few weeks ago it was finalized. So you're going to have hot information just off the press to actually now consume and learn. This is super interesting. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Peik. So hi everyone, my name is Emilia and I'm here today with Nina, and we are going to present our findings from the project that we did in collaboration with EY on the course that we did now this spring. And we are Aalto University School of Business master students, and we will now present to you our findings. So just a second, I'm going to see that I have also access to the slides. Perfect now. So let's start up with basics. Why is 5G so important? There are many features, but we are going to focus here on the four most important ones based on our own project. So first of all, speed is super important. 5G will provide up to 100 times faster compared to 4G. And you can think, for example, when you are downloading a 2-hour video with 4G, it would take approximately 6 minutes, and with 5G, it would take around 4 seconds. So we can see that there is a big difference. The second one, latency, which simply is the amount of delay it takes to send information from one point to another. And latency with 4G is 50 milliseconds, and compared to 5G, it would be around 1 millisecond. And for reference, you can, with human eye-to-brain reaction, that would be, the latency would be 10 milliseconds, so 5G would actually be 10 times faster. So you can, for example, imagine a doctor being able to operate from distance a surgery. So that is something very powerful from 5G. And the third one, capacity, which also Peik mentioned that COVID has changed the situation quite drastically. And 5G is able to provide with 100 times more traffic compared to 4G. And the fourth one, reliability. And 5G would provide reliable and stable network connections with wider coverage. And you can see the quote here below, that remote controlling enabled by low latency is extremely necessary to help automatic cranes in error situations to ensure safety in operations. And that is one of the quotes from our interviews from our project. And next off, how did I change the slide? It's not changing. Well, next up, we will discuss the use cases, the industrial 5G use cases. The first one here is a remote control of machines. And that is simply that 5G enables the precise remote controlling of machinery from distance. And the second one here is augmented reality, AR, which 5G would also enable. And as came up in our interviews, there is interest that, for example, an expert that is placed in Finland could troubleshoot and fix a machine that is located in Australia. And that is something that requires the features that I mentioned earlier, low latency and high speed, as well as the high precise of 5G. The third one here is automated guided drones, which would be used for example, video surveillance in factories, and also for transporting things inside factories. And the fourth one here is mobile automated robots that would communicate together both with machinery and with people. And this is only something that 5G can provide with, since it requires ultra low latency, high speed, and high precisity. So we narrowed our research down to 2 research questions. And basically here, the first one, what kind of a role should telcos take? So, and we decided to focus on the Finnish manufacturing industry, since the manufacturing industry in Finland is very big. And also, as Peik showed earlier, it is one of the early adopters of 5G, and it has big potential. And then the second research question is more focused on the 5G monetization models from the telco perspective, which is interesting to find out what kind of, how can the telcos make money out of 5G. And quickly, what we did was we conducted 10 interviews, 9 video interviews due to the coronavirus situation, and 1 telephone interview. And we started off with background knowledge to understand what is happening in the 5G field. And then we moved on to professors, and after that discussed with telcos and service providers and manufacturing companies in Finland. And next off, Nina will continue to our findings and recommendations from the project.
Okay. Thank you, Emilia. Does this work now? So, yes. When it comes to the findings of our interviews, we discovered a lot of things during the 10 weeks that we spent on this project. And we discussed all of those more in detail in our report, but here are just some of the highlights. First, regarding the first research question we had, what kind of role should telcos take in the B2B market with the 5G era? The first point that we discovered is that the market is still developing and uncertain. Most of the use cases will be in industry use within 2 to 3 years. And this means that all of our interviews were still somewhat on the speculation level. Secondly, we found out that the B2B market in 5G era is going to demand a lot of modifications. Companies will have very different types of needs, and those all need to be catered individually. At the moment, telcos don't really have the type of agility to serve these types of customers. As you can probably imagine, like the typical business model that telcos have at the moment is delivering bulk solutions to a ton of similar customers. Like you can think about your SIM card or the broadband connection at your home. And that's going to change in the B2B sector at least, and the traditional telco business model is not going to survive. Third, we found out that smaller players, so-called micro operators, are going to enter the field. One of the more notable ones is the EPSCom, or previously known as Ukkoverkot, which is a Finnish small micro operator. It was mentioned in like 4 of our interviews, so which means all of our like manufacturing industry interviews. What EPSCom does is they do these particularly specialized private networks for companies, and that makes them a very interesting future competitor to telcos. And moving on to our second research question, what kind of monetization models might work in the 5G era then? Here again, we have summarized this into 3 points. First, we found out that while some manufacturing companies see 5G as like just a next G, like Peik said, most Finnish companies actually do and are interested in the new use cases and opportunities that 5G will create. Secondly, manufacturing companies at the moment don't have really any sort of like confidence in more innovative pricing models like value sharing or revenue sharing or value-based pricing. In their opinion, like the 5G value is impossible to predict at the moment, which makes it really hard to create contracts that would be mutually satisfying. But it can also be that since this is only speculation at the moment, that they just lack imagination in this regard, and that might change in the future. Third, we really discovered far more questions than we could ever answer, especially with the questions about data. With the 5G, amount of data we collect with all the sensors and new devices is going to increase exponentially. And this leads to many questions about the ownership of data and who operates the network where all the data is processed. And as you can imagine, like all parties are interested in owning that data. Right now, the prevailing solution seems to be that whoever owns the hardware owns also the data. But next up, we can move on to our recommendations. After we analyzed our findings, we came to recommend 2 different business models for the 5G era telco. The first possible business model is here seen on the left, is the infrastructure as a service telco. This is more of an approach that allows telcos to continue their business as usual. This means that the bulk of their business is done in the B2C sector. But we do, however, recommend that they develop strong partnerships with different service providers to try to offer those B2B services that are more customized than their usual business is at the moment. The value chain for this type of a model is seen here on the right. These partners that they could think about collaborating with might be like Etteplan or EPSCom, which both came up in our interviews as potential or current partners for manufacturing companies. We also recommend that they would search for the early adopters of 5G in the customer section. This means the type of customers and industries that have the specific need for speed or precision, because those are the very things that 5G can especially help with. The second business model we recommend is the disruptive telco, which means that the telco would provide highly customized solutions for their customers. And this is a way more demanding approach, since it requires telcos to act really as startups. It's obviously includes much more investment and therefore risks, but could be also done. Our monetization recommendation is really quite simple. Just keep things as they are right now and operate on service level agreement. As mentioned earlier, the data ownership will become more important in the future, and this is why we recommend that telcos might consider a hybrid monetization models for customers. For example, all the hardware is sold to the client as a capital expense, but the telco will continue to lease and operate the 5G private network for the industry customer. This is also a model that came up in many of our interviews, so that's why we mention it here. And to wrap up our content, 5G is going to revolutionize how factories operate in the future. There is going to likely to be a huge leap in productivity once 5G gets fully rolling. But at the moment, there is a lot of uncertainty still, and telcos will need to adapt to this new era. Like one of our interviewees said, the race for the 5G market has begun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so have we received any questions from the audience? While you dig them up, so maybe you want to briefly say which part of your project, what did you find most interesting when you interviewed these companies?
I think it was the fact that like so many people have very different ideas. Like some of them are highly skeptical about 5G being anything more than a faster 4G, and some of them are really on the bandwagon for this and just like really hyping 5G and all the possibilities that come with it. There was a really like different people, but of course we only interviewed 10 people, so it explains that there was a lot of variety.
Yeah, I agree. And it was very interesting to see how the different companies, like you said, have very different approaches, and some people or some companies were very interested in investing and having like they have reserved kind of, okay, now we're going to invest and jump right to 5G and do everything for that. And some companies were waiting for, okay, well, maybe 6G will be the revolutionary, and there were like very different opinions, and that is it's a very scattered field.
Yeah.
I guess, one common thing we clearly have learned here is as well, the piece of education, everyone is looking for information, they're looking for ideas. It is a hot topic, and what you now in front of the screens now, honestly, it's makes so much sense to dig into this subject and think about how this will change the industries, the futures, what we do, and so on, because that's exactly what's happening. And this is definitely a little bit bigger change than what we saw between a 3G and 4G. So 4G to 5G will change things. It will take time, but we have some great examples from these interviews, how they expect and how they already play around with this and try to figure out what it means for us. Because after all, in a business world, the race for the benefits and optimizing your business, that's the key. And this might be one of the resolutions among others. So any questions from your end now, from the audience? Okay. So we have one question. What kind of advantages small enterprises have over big ones? Okay, what do you think?
They might be more agile and just they could adopt these new things much faster, since they don't have these like really just
the history of legacy and so on.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
exactly.
Yeah,
Good points. Do you think there's any drawbacks? What for a small what would be their challenges to jump on new things?
Well, it requires a lot of investment.
Yes.
That would be like the most crucial one.
Yeah. Then here's a question. Will people lose jobs if we introduce 5G in the industries? Okay. What do you think?
Well, it did not come up in our interviews.
No.
And I think it's more of like the communication and the cooperation between machinery and humans. I don't see it as a big threat, but I've heard that people talk about this, but it did not come up in our project in any way.
I would think that it creates more jobs. Like even if some factories don't have as many employees after having 5G and some automation and drones and stuff like that, then you need new kinds of employees.
Exactly.
That's a very valid and good answer, because one key in 5G is really for a lot of companies, they need to figure, it requires a new kind of skill sets. You need to understand what is cloudification, what about, using new modern tools and so on. So many industries, they see that, okay, some jobs might become redundant, right? But that has been happening all since, the horse became a car and so on. This is the same thing. But at the same time, it creates new jobs. So education, again, is a key that you need to stay on top of the bandwagon. But then we shouldn't forget, and this is just the fact that some industries where workforce labor is still, cheap, then, you will not see a very quick pickup in 5G, because investing in super expensive technologies to produce a cheaper product that by the end of the day doesn't have a huge margin, that will never fly. So you will still see naturally the existing jobs be there, but in greenfield factories and so on, for sure, 5G will create a new thing, and all of these cloudifications and the apps on top of it and understanding of the data, what you can do with it, that will be a key. Then we'll see what types of professional were the interviewed person, CEO, CTO, CIO, etc. Okay,
this
very
is a
interesting.
good one.
Yeah.
Because we were able to interview very top level people, and especially the manufacturing companies, they were the big ones in Finland, and we were able to discuss with very high
CTOs and CDOs.
So we had very top people there.
They actually remarkably secured a very, very high level of execs, and that simply also shows that there is a lot of interest in this subject.
Exactly.
So this really is an excellent proof point to what our analysis and studies, and then having a real study. This was obviously just in Finland, and we've been doing similar things in other places in the world, but similar trends are emerging there. Then we have a question: which vertical industry domain that you have observed are more interested to 5G than skeptics, and which verticals are more skeptical? Okay.
I don't know if we in the scope of this project really saw anything like regarding that, like because we had manufacturing companies in the very similar fields where one person was really keen on being like the early adopter of 5G and the other one was sort of like, okay, we'll see how it plays out and then we'll invest.
Yeah.
And the same with telcos and same with university professors, like in all the fields that we interviewed, there were very different approaches. So we can't really answer that.
Yeah, it is a tough question. And well, I mean, let's also think about where we are with 5G. So currently the standardization body, so what's now standardized is the fixed wireless access piece. The massive IoT and the low latency functionalities are being standardized, and they will be rolled out in a few years from now. Plus, the third thing is really around these licensing auctions. So in certain countries, there are no licenses yet available. So all industries are maybe not there yet. There's for sure always skepticism to things that why should we invest that, and especially on the industrial level, they've been using fixed wires and so on, and then suddenly why should they go to a new wireless technology? They are starting to see more and more benefits out of this, but for sure we will see much more trials and so on. Then where clearly there is also some skepticism is let's say, who's going to be the first patient in remote surgery? So that's kind of, if you want to sign up, I'm sure there's a lot of interest. But yeah, very good question. So to add one more on where you will see this uptake in kind of 5G and things. So one thing where we see this private network uptake and it's definitely going to be an uptake in 5G on industrial thing is really where you have large areas and mobility required. And let's say mining fields, large port areas and so on. And then adding sensors on top of it and getting more data and understanding how your information is flowing and really getting, you know, your, let's say the whole port operations to paperless and so on. So definitely there are first movers. And then factories is coming slowly after. But as we heard from the interview, there is a lot of interest, tests, and things ongoing. Mm-hmm. But also remember what I said in the presentation, that you know, chipsets and 5G module has to be embedded in all of the equipment that goes, also the robots that goes to the factory floor, and that's not yet the case. So it still will need to see, you know, the convergence of technologies and really the new greenfield factories with new equipment coming out. So brownfields, for sure, there's a lot of skepticism, and that's the case. Yeah. That's more or less all the questions I have here on this one right now.
Okay.
So I guess the final words to you. So what would you like to tell these students, everyone sitting in the other end listening and thinking about you know what we're telling them? So what are the key information that you want to tell them, the key things to take away? It can be anything.
Well, personally, I'd say if you're not too familiar with 5G yet, please familiarize yourself with it, because I've learned so much. I didn't know too much before the project, but the personal learning journey has been amazing, and I know now so much more, and all the possibilities and the jobs and what is happening in the field. It is very interesting. Look into it.
Yeah, and I think like I agree with that 100%. But on top of that, I would just like to say, like, it's so interesting to get to know this field where nobody knows so much about it. Like, it's just like everybody's asking the same questions, and you get to research something that is very new, and that's super exciting.
Yeah, and always after our interview, we had more questions than we started off with. You learned so much.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. I hope you also learn in the other end there something. And, you know, please drop questions offline and so on, and dig into this. There's a lot of information out on the internet, different courses and so on. And naturally, this course you're on, you're going to learn a lot. So, you know, stay tuned and listen in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we off? Niin, se nimenomaan.